Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar that's looking at those changes in the early years educator criteria. I hope you're all having a good start to the week and we're looking forward to talking you through those changes and the documentation that we've created in liaison with the moderation team to make sure it's as efficient and straightforward for you as it possibly can be. So welcome everyone.
Yes, welcome everyone. I'm just going to check that we're recording before we actually get into the proper swing of things.
We are indeed.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Then we will start running through. Are we encouraging questions in the chat, Janet? Just very quickly before we...
Yeah, absolutely. Please do pop your questions in the chat. We'll get through as many as we possibly can, hopefully, and you can put things in that you're hoping will be, get them off your mind if those are the things that you really want us to talk about. And if we've got time at the end, we'll go through those as much time as we possibly can. If not, then as we typically do, we'll go through them and we'll make sure that we report back and feedback on the questions that you might have.
Brilliant. Janet, so we've got the welcome slide up. Would you like to introduce yourself first and then Jen and I will say hi?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so hello everybody. I think I've probably met most of you by now. So my name's Janet King. I'm the Sector Manager for Education and Early Years here at NCFE. Thank you.
I'm Helen Scanlon. If I haven't met you, hello, welcome to the webinar. Thank you for spending some time with us today. I'm part of the provider development team along with Gemma.
Hi everybody, I think I've met some of you before. I'm noticing some familiar names, but my name's Gemma and I'm the Provider Development Officer for Education and Early Years at NCFE.
And we're going to turn our cameras off now. We've said hello, so you can concentrate on what the slides are showing and what Janet and I and Gemma are saying. So wonderful. I'll turn the camera off now.
Okay, so if we look at the outcomes for the session today, we're going to, this is the focus. We know that there are many questions and of course the changes that are impacted for September 24 to explore the new EYE, those DFE criteria, the EYE competency criteria document. We'll share tips for its practical application. So what does this mean? What are the implications for assessors in practice? And the practicalities of recording competency observations will be something that we can discuss that's going to be informed really by some of your comments and thoughts as well in the chat.
We're going to start off with a Slido. Yes, I'll just talk it through. So you've got a QR code there on your screen. If you could either use a camera to scan that, that'll take you straight to our Slido for this session. Or you can go to slido.com with that hashtag number and you'll be able to participate in today's Slidos and polls. So I'm just going to leave that on just for a minute or two, just to let people get logged in, and then we'll launch the Slido. We're going to start off by asking your starting confidence level in terms of the new criteria, today's topic. So just wait, as I say, another minute or so, just to allow people to scan that code to access the Slido. So you can see the question on the screen now. Please let us know on a scale of 1 to 10, with the low of being 1 and the 10 being high. Oh, straight away we've got a 1 to 10. How wonderful is that? That's great. Do you feel around using the new competency-based criteria? So we're just going to give a minute or two to allow you to let us know. Sometimes when we ask this question, we're asked if we can do minus numbers. So it's good that nobody's asked us in the chat about minus numbers at the moment. So yes, just let us know where you feel you are at the moment, with 1 being low and 10 being high. Janet, we've got a good range of scores there, haven't we?
We absolutely have. And I think that's, the honesty is clear here. This is brand new. It is something that's being introduced in September 24. And so these scores are realistic, aren't they, in terms of confidence levels when we've not actually engaged with it before now. So, yep, absolutely.
Lovely, thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. So thanks for giving us your answers there. Janet, over to you. What's going on in the early years?
Indeed, what's going on in the early years? Well, there's always a spotlight on the early years. And so I think it's important just to take a breather and just reflect on the different things that have happened, because we've had in the apprenticeship world, we've had a new standard we've had the mandated qualification come out of that, we've had mathematics stay in that, but mathematics come out for entry into the workforce, so many things going on. And amidst all of those changes, of course, one of the things that the focus of today's session is about the EYE criteria. So whilst we have all of those changes in the occupational standard, we've got to really bear in mind that's not really going to impact the qualification, the T-level qualification per se. What we're concerned with is the new developments within the Department for Education's early years educator criteria. And I think before we even go through what they are and look at the document, I think it's important to just reflect on a couple of things. Now, some of you will have heard me say this before, but actually, when I first looked at the criteria, I was kind of taken aback a little bit, and I looked at them, and I looked at them, and I looked at them, and I thought there's an awful lot of criteria here. And I know some of you will have counted them up and done a comparison with what your second years will be doing if you have second years going in into 20, finishing in 25. There are a lot, but if you take the 6 main criteria, what's happened for the new EYE criteria is that they've been broken down. They've almost been broken down into scaffolded little stages for each of that criteria. And that really was in response from DFE. What they've done is say, we need to standardize this. We need to make sure that this overarching criteria means this. And in discussions in their consultations and so on with providers and so on, they had to consider interpretation and different interpretations and how best to standardize that. And their response was to sort of put in those granular stages and scaffold the new criteria in such a way that would minimize any interpretation and allow for clearer and firmer standardization. So that's why the exercise has been done. That's why there's more of them, but they're actually, if you put them side by side, they merge quite well and there's just more detail around them. So that's one thing that we just have to appreciate. It took me a while to get to that point, but when I looked at them and investigated them and examined them side by side, I thought, okay, I get that. I can see what you've done and I have to appreciate and accept why you've done it. So that was one thing. And we all have to be there. The second thing was about making sure that we do the right thing by our second year students. So we've got to remember that students who started in 23 and who will be finishing in next summer in 25, they will carry on completing the competencies for assignment 2 part 1 and indeed 2 that they started with. This is ethically correct because they'll have been doing observations all the way through their programme. So it's important to note that the current, I suppose, because these don't come into effect until September 24, your current students will use the current assignment 1 and 2. And there is absolutely no problem or concern with those being full and relevant on the DFE's qualification checker. So this is not going to be a problem. It's full and relevant. Second years finish what they started. First years registering from 24 will be using the documentation that we're going to go through this morning. So I think we're going to have a look at it. Okay, so here we are. So we know why, and we know sort of how they've done that. in terms of breaking things down. What does it mean from a practical point of view? What does it mean for you as assessors delivering on the competency side? Now, we acknowledge that if you've got second years coming up when they come back in September and you've got your first years, there's going to be that transitional period. We acknowledge that. But this document is for those students from 24 only. And I know I'm labouring the point, but it is very important. Now, as we look through this section here, and we can stay at the top of it, Helen, for a moment, sorry. So the way that this has been arranged is through different sections. So part 1 and section 1 is all the recording forms, and they're the forms that you will be familiar with if you've been assessing previously, but if not, we're going to take a look at those in a moment. But I just want to show you the whole content. So as we scroll down to that assessor guide and child development, you'll notice that this is what we've done with all of that criteria. Somebody somewhere will know that there's just over 100 of these competencies now. And what we've done to try and show what the DFE have done in terms of breaking the originals down into a scaffolded, more exemplified version is we've put them into thematic sections. So you can see there, one of the main headings is child development. And then under that, stages and sequences, factors impacting child development, communication and language. And those 3 sub-criteria, if you like, or sub-themes, they include all of the criteria, all of the EYE criteria that have got some association with child development. And that means that when you're planning as assessors, when you're starting to plan, when you're thinking about what you might aim to see, I know these things take on their holistic journey, and that's absolutely as it should be. But when you're planning with your students, then at least you'll know as assessors, if I'm looking towards something that's around child development, then actually what else might I see? What else might I be able to ask a professional discussion on? And they've been put together to help you as assessors to, rather than when you're not familiar with that range of criteria, the way it's now been broken down, it would be quite easy to unintentionally miss something that you could have captured that may have been something that could have been brought into a professional discussion, for example. So it puts it all in one place for you. It's a little bit, I think I use the analogy of going shopping and you use your shopping list, and when you're in the aisle, you're looking down your shopping list, see, is there anything else on my list from this aisle? And that's what we've kind of tried to do here. And the second main heading is curriculum and learning. So the sub-themes that we've got there: assessment, evidence-based theory, early years foundation stage related criteria, meeting individual needs of babies and children, and pedagogical approaches. And they again have been collated and put together under curriculum. We then do the same with the main heading of SEND, so special educational needs and disability, and we've looked at the EYE criteria and chosen from there what best fits here, which is obviously some knowledge around the code of practice and how to support babies and children with SEND. We then looked at how the DFE had arranged their EYE criteria around safeguarding and welfare, which very much sort of mirrored section 3 from the early years foundation stage. So you'll see some familiarity with that. So safeguarding and welfare is looking at well-being, maintaining a safe environment, child protection, hygienic environments, food and drink requirements, and personal care routines. So again, you'll find all of the things that are related to that there, which may well give that opportunity for you to be able to plan for some things through an observation, but also know what can I bring into a professional discussion if it's relevant and appropriate to do so. It is most likely to be from those areas. So everything is in one place. We then have health and safety. That's looking at legislation and guidance, policy and procedures. Equality and inclusion is another main heading, with anti-discriminatory practice and legislation there also. And then lastly, but certainly not least, the roles and responsibilities. So professional practice and partnership working going within that section as well. So let's take ourselves through the document now. And of course, you will be able to find this. This is under support materials, early years educator assignment to First Teach from September 24. But I'm sure we can also find the link and pop that into the chat if we've not already done so. Now, as we go through these different forms, I just want to say one thing that I hope will be of reassurance. Professional discussion is something that can be used to complement all of the EYE criteria. So you have got professional discussion to help and to be able to maximise the students' understanding and enhance that knowledge and practical skills application throughout this process. And that really is good. There are some things, as we go through, I will point out that actually as a team of moderators, they thought we would really like to see this, but we also know that it can be complemented by professional discussion. So bear that in mind, that you have got that. So things that you see, but you might not see in full, or that you go many times and it's just not as naturally occurring as you thought it would be, or indeed it's a protection related issue, and let's hope your students are not exposed to that. So it will give you the idea, and it will give you the functionality, if you like, and flexibility through professional discussion, remembering, of course, that everything in assignment 2 part 1 is in the context of that student's own experience. So coming back to these these forms, you'll see that there's a planning form, there's the observation, there's the professional discussion forms, future planning, and then the criteria and where you're making those judgments that you're signing off at the very end. Feedback forms are there, and the final assessment judgment form as well. So everything's in one place, and we'll just have a quick look at that so that you can see what we mean. And there is a Word version of this, so you will be able to download, etc., and use these forms as you've been using them before, or if you're using them for the first time, this is how you would go through that. So you would your initial observation planning form, and I would say that planning with your student, even when that takes on its holistic nature, planning with your student is so important and will really help them when it comes to their preparation for their structured observations in their second year. So remembering, of course, that assignment 2 part 1 is something that students will start as soon as they're settled in their placements at DBS, and any other settling in inductions have taken place. Then assignment 2 part 1, this document can be used with your students, and in the all the way through, and in the second year 3 structured observations will be undertaken. What I will say at this point, those 3 structured observations only make reference to a couple of EYE criteria, and those have been replaced for the students who start in 24. So when they start their structured observations, any EYE criteria will have been replaced by the best fit, if you like, from the new criteria. So we've got activity plans in there that also help with the students' planning, and as much detail as they can, because this is getting them used to the importance of planning, the significance of being organised and aware, and it's ideal preparation, as I say, for those structured observations, and just to keep them really focused on what makes an early years educator. As far as the Department for Education are concerned, these criteria are what you have to know about and be able to do in the context of your own experience during training. So it's a really good thing to actually understand and even talk about during induction in terms of what makes an early years educator. Then we've got the actual skills recording form there, again, downloadable. It's all available as Word documents, so you can extend on that and so on. It's got all the details that you would need in there. So no changes to any of this documentation. Then we've got the professional discussion form. So I would say, remember that if you're doing a professional discussion, that actually you're using that to complement and supplement what you've seen or what's been hinted at in the observation by the student, and that also where it's appropriate, you're allowing the student to bring in activities that they've done with children or observations of children that they've completed, or maybe work based policies, risk assessments and so on. They can bring in some of those reflections and some of those work products, but they will use those not as a script, but rather to move their discussions forward. So everything will be recorded as either an observation or a professional discussion, or indeed both. And then obviously you'll be giving some feedback. You'll be thinking about what are we going to do next. These are all that holistic side, which again inform that cycle, and the student will begin to do their planning and preparation ready for the next visit, and on it goes. So the cycle as it ever was. There's the feedback form. And you may find, this is a discussion that we're having with moderators, that the feedback form that you give to students and the assessor judgments and justifications sometimes take on a dual feeling, a dual role. And so we're looking at how we can perhaps speak to moderators and get their opinions on how we could use that more efficiently. But that's something that obviously will be taken outside of this meeting, and I just want you to be aware that we are aware of the time that is being taken to write up observations and to make those justifications at the moment, so we are aware.
Janet, I'm just going to chip in for a second, if that's all right. We've had a couple of little questions in the chat, and I thought I'd just take the opportunity.
Lovely.
Somebody's asked whether or not the professional discussion needs to be recorded or handwritten. Is there a preference? Can either be done?
Okay, so either. It's absolutely up to you. If you're using the paper version, then you would quite clearly put the criteria that the professional discussion is meeting down the side. If you're recording, then you would have to give some sort of clear commentary in terms of which criteria is being met and so on. And anyone who's doing one over the other, it would be really interesting if you've gone through moderation already, if you've got any feedback on that, to pop something into the chat, because that's the best advice really when somebody's actually gone through that. So either, no preference.
Thanks,
just
Janet.
making it clear, where the criteria is being met for ease on a recording, especially, I guess.
Thanks, Janet. I'm sorry for interrupting. I just thought we'd tackle a few of these as they're coming in, because they're really good questions.
Yeah, of course.
The next one we've had, Maria says, are all of these mandatory forms, which is linked to the next question. Are we able to use our own version of these forms as we've done this year?
Okay, so it's the process that's mandatory. So you do need to make sure you've got all of the information contained within. When you come to the moderator networks, we can certainly ask about that. I don't think there's anything that says you must use these forms. You must meet the process, you must follow the process, make sure that everything captured on the forms here is being captured in any documentation you're using. When it comes to collating the evidence, I think the way that it's been arranged this time through this thematic approach might be something you give some thoughts to if you were thinking about devising your own approach. But again, this is something that we can share with moderators. If it's worked the first time and it's been okay, then I see that you would just need to be mindful of the increasing competence and the way that this has been arranged to help with that holistic side of things. But I do know, for example, that some people will take the elements and the POs of the appropriate of the T level in terms of the EYE, and they're looking to see, right, okay, what's being taught at the moment, which themes therefore live under that. You know, there are different ways of doing things, but it's to make sure that you have got the evidence, that's the bottom line, and that everything within that process, within the forms that have been mentioned, is being captured somehow, somewhere.
Thanks, Janet. Couple more quick ones and then we'll move on to having a look at the actual criteria. Does the professional discussion need to be completed in placement or can it be completed in college?
Okay, so the professional discussion can take place outside of the early years setting. So it can take place in the school or in the college environment. Obviously, we try where possible, and I know you do, to be able to do these things as efficiently as possible. So what we would say, and what the moderators would echo, I'm sure, is that you do your professional discussion as soon as you possibly can after the observations taken place, if it can't happen within the actual environment. And that's understandable sometimes, isn't it, with ratios, with things that are going on, and not being able to come out, or not finding somewhere where you can have that discussion quietly. So understand that and appreciate that. So you can do it outside of the classroom, just outside of the early years setting, in a classroom type situation, but bearing in mind that it's preferable that that's done as soon as possible after the observation's taken place.
Thanks, Janet. And last one before we move on, somebody's asked, when they're doing their write-up for the observations, can they use bullet points? Is that sufficient?
They need to be thinking about that assessment justification. So the more detail that you can capture, the better, I would always say. Just like when you're explaining the power of observations to your students, and the detail is paramount really to being to guiding you towards that assessment justification. So you're going to use the information you collect to justify your decision in terms of competence. So what I would say is that the more detail, the better.
Thanks, Janet. We'll leave it there and we'll come back to questions in the chat in a bit. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's take a look at the actual form then. So the actual criteria. So you've seen how it's going to be arranged. Now, this is your shopping list where we were talking about everything being in the supermarket, but we're not sure which aisle we're going to get it from at the moment. This is the whole thing. So you'll see here that this is what the student needs to map towards. This is what they're actually going to show in terms of achievement, and where that's actually going to be stored. So whether that's in a hard copy portfolio, paper portfolio, or whether that's on an e-portfolio and so on. Eventually everything is going to be referenced here, and that goes all the way from 1.1 all the way through to 6.G. So you'll know, or 6G. So you will know as we scroll through these, and we can scroll through them like that. There are many, but you'll also see that there are some familiarity in terms of that was there before. Now it's just been broken down into steps. So yes, the student has to show evidence for all of these. However, they really are a part of something else. That bigger theme. I'm going to ask Helen just to stop there on when we get to 1C, sorry, keep going, 1CA. When we get down to 1CA, the letters, by the way, are more of your skills application, whereas the others are more sort of knowledge awareness that needs to be seen in context of the student's own experiences. So we're getting there. You can see what I mean about them being broken down. So when we get to 1CA, we're still on the Bs. 1CA. So 1CA and 1CC. So these are the ones that the moderators have said, yep, absolutely, they can be complemented and supplemented by professional discussion. We get that. And that's really important when there's a lot of things attached to one particular criterion, like there are here with the 4 bullet points, for example. But they would expect, the moderators would really expect 1CA to be observed. So yes, you're using both methods, but there are some here that lend themselves very much to observation. And so they've highlighted those, and we can make sure that we share that with you. But 1CA is one of them. So select and combine the best pedagogical approaches based on the curriculum and children's prior knowledge, considering an appropriate balance of adult and child-led activities. So you might need to be asking the student about why did you choose to do something, you know, and you're gaining that information about the prior knowledge of a child or group of children, and about the importance of adult and child-led activities. But then you're actually observing and seeing the bullet points. So you should be seeing role modelling and supporting children's group learning and socialisation, for example. Listening to or being subject to students reading a story with expression and clarity, something you could plan for. Explaining new concepts with clarity and precision, communicating with children, you're going to get that through that, using strategies for supporting early literacy and mathematics, and hopefully that will come out in the sort of everyday language and the narrative stories that the students will have when they're talking to the children. And the other one, 1CC, was mentioned by the moderators as well, because they would expect this to be naturally occurring. Responding to the needs and interests of the child to support intended learning, giving encouragement, introducing the child to new interests, applying strategies to develop and extend children's development, learning and thinking, including sustained shared thinking. I don't know if it goes on to the other page there, and then we scroll down. No, that's it. So you'll see that yes, professional discussion can be used. What the moderators are very keen to say is where you've got things that are accompanied by a letter. So you've got the 1C, for example, and it goes knowledge statements that need to be seen where you can, or professional discussion around in context. And then you have within that section the skills elements that are the applied knowledge there. Try and see, which I know you do, as much as you possibly can, and then complement and supplement that with professional discussion. Likewise, there are going to be some, especially around child protection, where a professional discussion is going to be the most obvious method. And you may be able to see elements of safeguarding, absolutely, and safe use of resources and equality and so on. But you're very unlikely to see the child protection side of things. And that's the aspect that you would rely on for the professional discussion. So a lot of these things will come down to your professional judgment, but the moderator's message would be where it's skills application, observe as much as you can. We all know that's the best way of seeing competencies and making those decisions around what children around what students are capable of and those competencies over time. And remembering, of course, that this is around competence over time, and that there is the element, there is a time constraint. We're on a time constraint to be able to finish the qualification per se, aren't we? But just making sure that we get as familiar as we can with the competencies and those areas that are more aligned to naturally occurring circumstances and situations with babies and children that the student is more than likely going to be observed in, and then complement with professional discussion where you need to or where you can. So this goes then down, that's your big long list, that's your shopping list. And then you'll see in reality, you'll see what I mean by the fact we're only on 2 now, and then 3, 4, and I kept going and kept going with my big long list when I was looking at it the first time. And then I looked at it again and I thought, okay, I see what you've done here. So don't be too overwhelmed by that, but it's a part of the journey, I think, to look at it and to appreciate what's being required. So you're making your final assessment judgment there when the criteria has all been met. And then here we go. So this is under that main heading of child development. So if we just scroll down a teeny bit more, we can see that this is, sorry, up a little bit more. Just at the very top, it'll say child development. So child development, thank you. Child development is your main header, and then stages and sequences becoming that subheading there. So everything to do with child development stages and sequences from the EYE criteria is sort of 1.2 and 1.3, and those of you who've been assessing already on using these using the EYE criteria will know that there's some familiarity there with what was there before. So it's been broken down a little bit, and so students will still be collating the evidence. And I know somebody popped something in the chat, I think, about babies, and I guess this is prudent to this particular section. Now it used to be 1.1 in the current, and now it's kind of broken down in 1.2, 1.2 and 1.3, looking at those different stages and sequences here. So we would always say that it is best practice to have hands-on experience across the age range. What we appreciate is that it's not always possible to work to any substantial amount of time with a particular age range, and that tends to be the babies, and that was the nature of the query or question comment in the chat there. So what is important is that every criterion must be evidenced. So if the student is working with 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, but you want to talk about babies to be able to say, how would you adapt your plans? What would the needs be of babies, or use any reflective accounts to encourage that? Then those will be acceptable. So it can come out through that professional discussion where the student is showing their awareness of the age ranges that they're not directly working with, and what they would be able to, what they would do to apply the knowledge in different circumstances. So we acknowledge that you may not, your students may not work with babies, but all criteria must be met. And then you'll see that this goes through the same process as it ever was. Reflective accounts, yes, they can be used. And as we go down, you'll notice that professional discussion is either an observation or it's a professional discussion. Can professional discussions be informed by things like reflective accounts, work products, any observations the students have done on children that they're working with, or activity plans and so on? Relevant information to help move the discussion forward? Yes. Should that information be used as a script? No. It is there to give examples. It is there to exemplify and to help move a discussion forward. Those students will be aware of the criteria that's being planned for, and may well have prepared for a professional discussion, and they may well want to bring information forward that is used to help that discussion move forward. It's a bit of a prompt. It is not some and it shows how they've understood. It must be in the context of their practical experience, and should not be an alternative to an observation where possible. Okay, so you'll notice that in all of these, professional discussions are allowed, but the note from the moderator, obviously best practice is to see and observe as much as you possibly can. And then you begin to make your assessment justification. So you're looking at the guidance here and thinking, okay, what does a competent student look like? What does a student who's working towards competence feel like? And you'll use your professional judgment to be able to actually say, right, okay, I'm happy that this has been seen, etc., or not, as the case may be. And so you're going to be giving the student feedback on their next steps and their next steps planning, and then you'll come back to this assessment justification and be adding to that when the student has finally achieved their competencies. So just as always, when you're making assessment decisions, this is around what you see, what you hear, the level of confidence that you have based on your experience. That professional judgment is what is needed and what is trusted here, and you bring that forward and justify why you feel that student has met the competencies when they have. Let's move forward through the document. So there's another example. We're looking at factors affecting development. So these are things that they might come up naturally in terms of what's going on in the observation, and then you might want to draw some of these things out through your professional discussion there. So professional discussion here can be used to meet 1.7, the ways babies and children's learning and development can be affected by their circumstances, and 2.5, the fact that difficult or withdrawn behaviour doesn't necessarily mean that a baby or child has SEND. And of course, so talking about some of those things might be something that naturally comes out of a situation that you've observed.
Should we take a few questions, Janet, if that's all right? We've got quite a few and I'm just conscious of the time.
Yes.
So with the changing criteria, will the performance outcomes for Year 2 delivery be updated along with the scheme of work and session plans created by NCFE?
Well, just to reassure you that because those 5 performance outcomes in the early years educator occupational specialism have remained very broad. So they've remained very broad in terms of being able to relate to the EYFS and so on. There is no intention to change those performance outcomes at all, and everything will fall in line. So the document that's being used here is literally a replacement for assignment 2 part 1. When it comes to anything else, you will just follow the specification. And of course, from September 24, there is a new version of the qualification spec that's live for you to follow. It's there on the website now, so you can use that for your planning. There have been no changes to performance outcomes 1 to 5, as they remain very broad.
Thanks, Janet. Yes, I have put the link to the new spec and the new criteria in the chat a couple of times, but I'll do it again towards the end. So you can access those there. Mercedes has asked, when a criteria has bullet points, do we need to see or discuss each individual point?
You need to meet the competencies in full. So I would say yes, bearing in mind some may be seen, some may be hinted at, some may be pure PD.
Thanks, Janet. I'm just looking, a couple have already been answered as we've gone along. Nasima says, what about learners that are placed in schools?
Okay, so learners that are in schools are going to, obviously they'll be in reception class, so they'll be following the early years foundation stage. So that in itself is not a problem. What I would say is that, 0 to 5 is a massive range of learning going on in those particular formative years. So if a student is following or doing their placement in a school, in a reception class, where the teacher is being guarded and guided by the early years foundation stage, it's not a problem. But I would say that those students would absolutely benefit from experience with younger children. So whilst we may not be able to have sort of practical hands-on experience with babies like we would like to, definitely we should be having some experience with toddlers, rising twos, rising threes, rising fours, because I think that is so important to see that growth and see the development in action and the needs of children, and individual children's needs over that span. So take some time to make sure that you're working with younger children also.
Thanks, Janet. Just a couple more. Can reflective accounts be used? I think you covered that earlier on when you were talking about that sort of supporting evidence.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think reflective accounts may be very useful for evidencing, experience with babies, for example. So you could use reflective accounts. So when the student is explaining, when it comes to a professional discussion, following an observation and an activity that the assessor may have seen with a particular age range, I think it's then that you might use, or the student might bring forward, a reflective account or work that they've done with babies to talk about how they might adapt or how they did adapt when working with younger children, or indeed older children across this age range, equally relevant as well.
Thanks, Janet. The questions keep coming. So how is neurological and brain development covered?
Okay, so this is I think if we go back, I think it's 1.2 and 1.3 within the child development section. So there we go. So we've got neurological and brain development there. So this again would be something there where you might be talking about cognition. You may be talking about the learning opportunities that the student has brought forward with the activity, or the way that they've been communicating in part of their natural quality interactions with the children. And then talking about the importance of making sure we are aware of. So this is something where you would lean into a professional discussion around early brain development. We're not expecting a student to talk about neurons and synapses and pruning, etc., but we are expecting that student to understand that this is a journey, and that the experiences that a child has are going to impact their disposition to learning, and the way that they learn, and the way that they feel about learning. So bringing in again some information, and that could be using some of their learning from their classroom environment, from the work that they've done within their different performance outcomes and elements, for example, but using that to explain or contextualize why they're doing what they're doing with the babies and children in their own settings, and how it's helping them to learn. So it's at the right stage, and there's an acknowledgement of the experiences that a child has around the importance of language, for example, discovery, play, exploration, and how those experiences and opportunities feed a healthy brain.
Thanks, Janet. I'm just looking back through, see if there's any more questions. Yeah, so one of them was, do we need to complete an assessor justification for all EYE criteria?
Yes, you would follow this document. So for all of the different sections here, you'll see that there's an assessment justification. So where criteria have been put together, like this, well, most of them, for example, and here we've got 1.2 and 1.3, you'll be doing your assessment justification based on those two criteria, but you can do a holistic write-up, making sure that there's evidence for both of those criteria within your description. And if you refer to the competency column that gives examples of how do we know when a student is competent, then you can use the words from that, match it with the evidence you've seen, or the discussions that you've had, and use some of those keywords from the competency column to help you make your justifications.
And last one, I think, Janet, but if there are any further questions, I'm just conscious of time, you can pop them in an email to myself or Janet, and we'll try and answer them after the session. Is it just 0 to 5 years or 0 to 7 for placement experience, as the competencies want coverage of 0 to 7?
Yeah, and there's the example right there in 1.2 and 1.3, where that knowledge base is is sort of wider, and that's the early years educator criteria, imploring students really to know more about why children, that key stage 1 sort of element, if you like, and moving on, that readiness at school, being ready for the children. So it's only going to really come in that evidence there of knowledge, where you're implying a knowledge through professional discussion. Practical experience is in with the with children under 5, following the children following the EYFS.
Thanks, Janet. I'm just going to revisit the slides here and move on slightly. We might still have a little bit of time for questioning at the end. There's some comments popping into the chat, Janet, saying about that's going to increase workload massively. Currently, we include some of these within our feedback, but not for every criteria.
Okay, I mean, as I said at the beginning, we're talking, we're in discussions with moderators in terms of anything we can do to help with the efficiency and the scaling up. We're very appreciative of that. We do have to make sure that we are giving due diligence to that EYE criteria. That's what makes this full and relevant. So we do have to make sure that we've got that evidence there. But looking at the competencies, looking at the that column that says this is what you're looking for a student to be competent, using some of those keywords, making that your professional, your professional justifications will help. And we also really hope, and strongly the intention was that the thematic approach would help with the planning. As with all things, we'll monitor and we'll see how it goes, and we'll listen to feedback. But the bottom line is that this is the Department for Education's early years educator criteria, and students need to evidence that in order to gain that full license to practice. So we're on this journey together.
Yes, I'd just echo that really from a provider development point of view, that everything that we receive in terms of feedback and how these documents are working, how these are actually being applied in practice, and how they work for you is really important. We can feed that back. We are advocates for you guys out there in the classrooms and doing these observations. We want you to share that feedback in the event that we can take it forward and hopefully make changes where they're required. But as with everything, and as Janet says, these are the criteria that we're working with. Please do keep getting in touch with us around how this is working so that we can kind of gather that feedback. And do remember that when you're making these justifications, if you've taught early years before and done observations in previous iterations of qualifications, it's very much a similar process. The recording of it does seem slightly larger and slightly different, but you guys all know what a level 3 practitioner looks like and the kind of things you're looking for. It's just getting to grips with those new forms, I guess, isn't it, Janet, and how things are grouped together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know there's a couple of questions that I will just try and address around starting the competencies in year 1. You absolutely can start building your students' portfolios, whether that's an e-portfolio or a paper-based file portfolio, with the information. So you've got 750 hours. Your students are going to be in placement as soon as they possibly can within that first term, DBS, etc., and inductions excluded. And then you can actually, once your students are settled, you can start to make competency decisions. What you've just got to bear in mind is that eventually down the line, yes, it's subject to moderation, because the practical placement side of things is the element, it belongs to the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education, and part of that quality assurance arm is that moderation process is in place. But you can, and that doesn't happen until much later, but you can and should start to develop that portfolio, because this is about giving students the feedback that they need to be able to blossom, to grow, and to develop over time. So do start to make those professional judgment decisions. It will just be the confirmation of the sign off, if you like, and the confirmation that everything is subject to moderation is the bottom line that you would use with your students. But please don't hold back the observation and the professional discussion process.
Thanks, Janet. Just to close the session, so we do have some useful links on the screen now that Janet's shared with you in order to support you with the new criteria. And the second one from the bottom is actually the document that we've been looking at today. So you will be able to get access to that, and I have popped that in the chat as well. Moving forward, we've got another Slido. Now, again, it's a confidence-based Slido, so we're looking at whether or not you feel more confident now that we've reached the end of the session in terms of what those criteria look like and how they're grouped together, and in sort of the document as a whole, I guess, is what I'm saying. So if you have got the Slido, please do access that poll for us. And we hope that you've either increased or at least stayed the same. We will be able to take questions into the chat, and if we can't answer them all at the end, because I'm aware we're at time now, we can take them away and get back in touch with people with answers to their questions. Lovely, thank you. Perfect. Okay, that'll continue to run in the background. Okay, so on our last slide here, we've just got a QR code, another one for you to scan, and this is about an evaluation for today's event. So what Janet has done today, talking through this document, was actually in response to some feedback we received from another event. So your feedback does get listened to, and we really do appreciate it. So if you could scan the QR code and leave us some feedback for today. It'll also give you an opportunity to make any comments based on today or anything that you'd like us to raise at a later date. And we will look forward to seeing you at events in the future. There is one more event coming on Thursday afternoon for any of you that are new to delivery of the T-level and start in September 24. We've a prep to teach event. So I'd love to see you at that, and I'll pop the link to that in the chat before we log off. But for now, I'd just like to thank Janet, and I'll leave this up on the screen and pop some links into the chat for you as we close this session.
Thank you, Gemma. And just a final word from me really is that you are all experienced, you're specialists in what you do, you're experts in this field. Making these professional judgments is something that is so familiar. I think there was a comment in the chat about making those decisions, observing holistically, giving feedback, making justifications. Yes, fundamentally that cycle continues. So really do, I mean, we acknowledge your experience and your specialism and your expertise. So good luck with it all, because I know it's slightly different than what you've been doing, but it's something that you can do and that you will become more familiar with. And thank you for what you do as well.
Yes, thanks everybody. We'll close the session there, but as I say, any questions, do reach out, do get in touch, and we'll be happy to answer them where we can. We hope you all have a lovely summer if you're having some time off, and hope to see you at some more sessions in the future. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.